I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking all about low estrogen and what you can do to improve your estrogen so you can get pregnant this year. So we're talking about some symptoms, what to look for, and the underlying causes of low estrogen. And no, it is not about forcing your body with hormones and medication to increase the estrogen. What can we do working on your health? You're in a very powerful position right now to make changes. And so today we're going to be giving you some action items that you can do right now to improve low estrogen. Let's go. Hey, Katie, excited to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I'm just going to get this mic over here. Okay, so today we're talking about low estrogen. So a lot of people on the fertility journey, you have that low AMH to high FSH, your estrogen is low, and then they're telling you, you're in perimenopause or menopause is around the corner. What we know for sure with functional medicine and functional nutrition, there's a lot of things we can do to improve estrogen levels. And it's not just about, taking an HRT and hormone replacement therapy and bringing it up falsely or using medication, although that can be part of it. Many times, the doctor is going to be doing things to boost this along the way, such some medications, especially if you don't have your period back, doing Provera and other Clomid, things like that. So we're looking at this underlying causes of why the estrogen is low and specific strategies you can do right now to actually improve it. So, let's just talk about, first of all, why is estrogen so important for reproductive health?
Yes. So estrogen, you say estrogen, I say estrogen. We're talking about the same thing.
Good, yeah.
So really estrogen is the one of the two main players as far as female sex hormones go. It also plays a role for men too. Men do produce estrogen too, just a far lesser amount. But for us, our cyclical people, it is one of the primary hormones, and so it's produced in the ovary. So it tends to build up. There's as with all hormones, there's a messaging, a communication system between the brain and that particular endocrine system in the body. So the brain speaks to our ovaries and tells our ovaries to start to produce estrogen. And this is with a view to maturing and releasing an egg. So your eggs are contained as little follicles, and one follicle will then, in that cycle, in response to estrogen, start to dominate, and that is the follicle that in a normal menstrual cycle will be released in ovulation, that cycle. And then we have a bit of a switch out, and ovulation drops after ovulation, and then the corpus luteum, which is the shell from the follicle, so the follicle that contained the egg, then becomes metabolically active and starts to produce the progesterone. And progesterone, which we're not talking about today, but is important in the context of estrogen, is the progestation hormone. So it's the hormone that then can help our bodies, in terms of our uterine lining, etc., to sustain a pregnancy if fertilization occurs. So the two hormones work in conjunction with one another. That second half of the cycle also sees estrogen take another little rise, again in preparation for pregnancy. And if that doesn't happen, if there's no fertilized egg, then in that last week, in that last 5 to 7 days of your menstrual cycle before your period arrives, then it all drops out. So that's how it works in a normal ovulatory menstrual cycle, right? So they do a dance with each other. Both hormones super important. And even when outside of the context of fertility, when we're thinking about just having a normal menstrual cycle and the health benefits that brings, then again, that dance between estrogen and progesterone is really helpful, because they both have a role to play, right? Estrogen, I love the way Carrie Jones always gives an analogy which I love about estrogen being like the diva, right? So we're talking about two best friends, and estrogen is like the diva. She's the wild one on a night out, and she's out there having a great time. She gets a bit out of control sometimes, she gets a little crazy. And then progesterone is like the sensible best friend. So progesterone comes in, puts her arm around each other. It's like, come on, friend, it's time to go home, right? So progesterone kind of brings that balance, and it's such a lovely analogy to think about it like that. So, estrogen is it's all about reproduction, it's all about fertility, but it's also quite it's all about cellular turnover. It keeps our bones healthy. It can be involved in our fat, both our fat production, but also if our fat is metabolically active too, and our fat can actually release estrogen and produce estrogen too. So it's a beautiful dance in a in a cycle that works well, and in cycles that are out of balance and aren't working as they should, then that communication all dials down, and actually if one thing doesn't lead to another, then none of it can occur.
Yeah, definitely check out that episode. We did a episode with Dr. Carrie Jones like years ago on this podcast. So it's all about FSH, and it's an awesome episode. So definitely check that out. Okay, so there's 4 types of estrogen. So let's just go into those, sort of a little recap here.
Yes, so estrogen is the overarching name, and within that there are 4 different types. There are three main ones. So we've got estrone is E1, estradiol E2. So estradiol is the main player. So most of if you're measuring estrogen in your blood, for example, you'll be measuring estradiol. We have estriol is E3, and then E4 is really only reserved for pregnancy. So and that's called estetrol. So that's usually the type of estrogen that's produced in pregnancy. So but estradiol is the most abundant one in the reproductive years.
Okay, and then you did talk a little bit about anything else you wanted to say about the progesterone piece. We've got a whole blog. I just did a detailed blog on this. You can check it out on fabfertile.com, all about progesterone, really why that's so important when you're on the fertility journey, and what can cause low progesterone. Like we're talking about this here, it's not just about we bioidenticals can be good to boost these things up, but we need to see why it's low. But anything you want to say there about progesterone, obviously with uterine lining, is really important.
Yeah, exactly. So the balancing effect of progesterone, as I say, progesterone is the progestation hormone, and so it helps in the context of fertility and pregnancy. It helps to maintain that really nice uterine lining, and also the cervical tissue as well, the kind of integrity of that. But it's also protective, right? So it protects our breast tissue. It's protective in terms of our cardiovascular health, and even our brain and our sleep. So progesterone is really calming. So what I said about that calming best friend. So progesterone is also closely aligned with GABA production in the brain. And so it's just really quite it's almost like a relaxant. It chills you out, and it's usually in the menstrual cycle, again in a healthy menstrual cycle. It's usually when progesterone drops out right at the end of that cycle. That's when people can start to get a little bit kind of angsty, some of those PMS type symptoms, because it's the progesterone that's dropped out. There are a few reasons. So the primary reason for progesterone not being produced is an anovulatory cycle. So, and that can be linked in with our estrogen as well, because we need enough of the estrogen to then ovulate, to then be able to produce the progesterone. So that's really the main reason. There are all sorts of reasons progesterone could be low outside of that as well, which maybe we won't go into today, but we'd always be thinking about ovulation first, and estrogen is the main player in supporting that ovulatory function.
Yeah, we'll link that progesterone blog in here so you can take a look at it. And then, excuse me, so some of the signs of low estrogen. So we've got dry skin. I feel like so obviously with being diagnosed with premature ovarian insufficiency, years later my health took a nosedive. I believe there was a whole bunch of, I definitely know there was some gut infections going on, environmental toxins, because I was living in the forest in this cedar house that always had an ant infestation, and then we were always spraying, and the dog died of cancer at 10, and I got fertility issues. My son, my brother's got blood cancer. So it's like some weird stuff. I don't know if it was exactly that spraying, and also my dad owned a chemical plant, which I worked in. And when I'm from 16, he had pool chemicals, and it was like laundry and dish soap and, massive powder silos and all this sort of stuff that I worked in doing payroll and HR back in the day. But yeah, was I exposed to all those environmental toxins? And then thinking I had probably a food sensitivity from, the beginning of time. And that then issues with my thyroid. So some of these symptoms I feel can be almost similar to a thyroid issue, right? So dry skin, yeah, thyroid, tender breasts, not necessarily, but weak or brittle bones, trouble concentrating, moodiness and irritability. I know I had that for years. Maybe my husband still thinks I have it, but I definitely don't feel as irritable. Vaginal dryness, yeah, like that's something struggled with, especially with low estrogen, it can be painful intercourse. Hot flashes and night sweats. We see a lot of our clients with this, right? So that's like, oh my goodness, we got the hot flashes and night sweats. I had mine in the early 20s, which I didn't even think that's what it was. And that can be very hard to deal with, to get proper sleep. Irregular periods, obviously, or no period, amenorrhea, which is when you're trying to conceive without the period being there. That just each month, just it's a reminder that something's not right, and it just has people getting even more stressed, which then potentially the period stays away. Weight gain around your belly, headaches before your period, libido issues, so decreased sex drive, and then feeling just exhausted or trouble sleeping. Anything you wanted to say about any of those cases?
Yeah, I think it's these are all the typical things that people would associate with with the perimenopause, right? And so or the menopause, so especially the sleep issues, the vaginal issues, and the hot flashes, these and also aching joints too, is some of the key players. These are all also, these are all things where there can be differential diagnoses. So it's not, it's not about having these symptoms and saying, right, that's it, I must have low estrogen. It's always worth actually checking as well. And there are so many ways that you can check your estrogen status. If you have all of those things and you also have no menstrual cycle, then there's a fairly good chance that you do have low estrogen. But again, you can check in things like the mirror test kits, for example, for at-home things. You can do blood work, you can do Dutch testing. There are so many ways that you can actually check your hormone status. So don't always just assume. I think we like to attach meaning to things as humans, and certainly when I was at nutrition school for 3 years and learning about all these signs and symptoms and conditions, and all of us would come away like self-diagnosing with, oh well, I must have thyroid and I must have this and I must have that, because you hear the things and you relate to them. So it's important to recognize that, not just take some symptoms and say, oh well, it must be this, but actually take a deeper dive. But those are some of the common symptoms. Also, just the second caveat there is to say that, again, just because you have those symptoms, or even if you do have low estrogen, just like what you were saying, Sarah, about being in your 20s, it doesn't mean that's it, right? It doesn't mean that that's it. I mean, look, if you've got a uterus and ovaries, the menopause is going to happen at some point. There's no denying that. But if you're in your 20s, 30s, even in your early 40s, there's a good chance that actually we can get that back on track with the right support, and there's something driving that, right? And so we just need to do the digging and understand what it is that's driving it.
Right. Is it really early menopause, or is it your adrenals, which impact the thyroid? Like there's a whole host of reasons as to what it could be. Interesting how the Brits always call it the menopause. You guys, the menopause, and we're like, menopause. I was like, that's funny.
I've never even noticed that. That's funny.
Yeah, we all have our ways of saying things. So definitely, testing. So Mira, the Mira fertility tracker, which we include in our Fab Fertile method. Also Anido, depending on which phone you have, I would like that one as well. So the Anido, doing blood blood testing and making sure that, where things are. And yeah, the Dutch test, so we can check out your adrenals and then check to see, each of the hormones and which pathways are going down. So then we can develop, a protocol for you. So I've done a podcast on Anido, also a podcast on Dutch 101. A lot of people are left going off and just doing a Dutch test. Woohoo, I did my Dutch test. No, like that is only part of the equation, and it's not even one that we start with. To me, if you're going to invest in a test, like look at the stool test, look at the health of the gut microbiome, and we can do all kinds of work there. But not to say the Dutch isn't part of it, but it's again doing these one-off tests and then saying, hey, it didn't work. You didn't put it all together. You missed out a crucial part of this. And so it is, we put it all together with the blood, with the fertility tracker, with testing to be able to fine tune this, track it, and fast track it so we don't waste time. And just off on those painful joints and muscles, obviously in the last year, I'm like, God, do I have a frozen shoulder? What the heck? And then I saw that from the menopause, it can be shoulder issues. And I was like, what? I can't even reach up here. And then, yeah, so interesting some of these different symptoms that we have, and, then going on bioidenticals and things like that. And lo and behold, some of these issues start to improve.
I will say as well, though, on that note, look, I think that the menopause has gained a lot of traction in recent years, and that's great. But then what happens when that happens is there's a big throwback or a big kickback, and it's all becomes very reactive. So I've got a client, I'll just share this story. I've got a client, she's not a fertility client, but she's in the perimenopausal years, and she's she had all, she had lots of symptoms of low estrogen, and including the achy joints. And she went to her GP, and her GP prescribed her estrogen with no progesterone, just estrogen on its own, without kind of really much else assessment at all. And she was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure if I really want to take this right now. And we've worked together for a couple of months, and those symptoms have completely gone now. So, I think it's important to note that just because you have those signs and symptoms doesn't mean you need to rush out and get an estrogen prescription necessarily. It just means actually we need to delve a little deeper and address the root causes.
Yeah, because that's just taking that siloed or allopathic way of looking at it, where you have this, we diagnose this, and we take that. Well, this approach is, why is the whole system not functioning? Like, it's if the majority of us can get pregnant naturally, which is true, the majority of us can get pregnant naturally. We need to bring things back online, boost up your immune system, and get the body in the best shape. And sure, IVF can be there for us if needed, but the majority of us don't need it. And it seems, in this culture right now with big pharma and big food and all sorts of, all these different conflicting massive bodies with trillions of dollars are pushing these things at us. And we got to focus on our health. And I think in the last 4 or 5 years, that has been extremely apparent for people. And people are coming around to be like, wait a minute, I don't need to wait for someone else to tell me what to do with my health. I have to take charge. And this is where you're in a very, powerful position to make change with this in a targeted manner. Okay, so some of the first reasons, we'll talk about some of the reasons and kind of what you can do here. Gut health. Katie and I have done, many podcasts together. We did a whole one on the GI map test, the stool test, talked about the gut, the gut microbiome. This is, if you got an infection in there, parasite, bacterial, fungal infection, that you can't outrun that. You need to address it, and that could be impacting your gut microbiome, which then directly can impact the ovaries and the sperm. But anything you wanted to say about gut health?
Yeah, I mean, really, just to reiterate, because we've spoken about it many times before, that the health of our gut matters so much for the health of the rest of our body. Our gut, there are 3 main ways in which that's the case. The first is that the food that we eat, so the nutrients that we eat make up the components and give us the building blocks for everything else that we need. And if we haven't got good gut health, then we're not going to be absorbing our nutrients very well. So you could have the best diet in the world but not be absorbing. The second is that the gut is one of the biggest causes of inflammation, one of the biggest sources of inflammation, right? And so if you've got dysbiosis, if you've got an imbalance of microbes, if you've got low-grade infections that you may or may not be aware of in the gut, then you won't be able to you're going to be inflamed, and inflammation is a cause of stress on the body, and any stressors on the body will, have the propensity to impact reproductive health. And then the other reason is that the microbiome, so the bugs that live in our gut, they interact with our hormones, right? And so there are a subset of bacteria that reside in the gut called the estrogen that directly interact with estrogen. So we just want to make sure that we've got really nice sets of bacteria in our guts to help estrogen function in the way that it wants to. And the next thing doesn't apply to low estrogen so much, but more to high estrogen. But we also need to be pooing regularly, and excreting, because our poop is the main way that excess estrogen exits the body. So our metabolized estrogen, and if we don't poop regularly, at least daily, then our estrogen metabolites, and that is actually, even if you have low estrogen, you still will have estrogen metabolites, and they are volatile, so they can recirculate back into the bloodstream and again drive inflammation forwards. So there's a number of reasons.
Yeah, we see that too. Even if you have low estrogen in relation to progesterone, it could still be high. And then so we see a lot of people so you don't need to have gut issues. You don't need to have digestive issues, but if you have them, then looking at food sensitivities and gut, you need to dig into that. You've got constipation, diarrhea, bloating, burping, gas. We need to know for sure. But if you've got skin issues, joint issues, autoimmune issues, mood issues, all those things, your neurotransmitters. It's not about taking another SSRI or anti-anxiety, all those sort of things. It's digging deeper into the health of your gut, and a lot of times people are able to taper off some of these medication with their doctor. Another ones we see are people doing, and I've done episodes this on the, amenorrhea, sort of that excessive exercise. So under eating and under fueling, and then over exercising, and that can then impact your estrogen and then your period. Eating disorders too. Anything you want to say there?
Yes. So I work with a lot of clients with eating disorders, and I guess, or not just, I don't work with that many people with an active eating disorder, but I work with a lot of people who have had eating disorders. And I will say that in my professional experience, if you have had eating disorders, you may be in recovery, but there's usually still that voice in there, right? I usually consider eating disorders as almost like an archetype that lives within us. And so if we talk about it as, my eating disorder, then that eating disorder is kind of always lives in there somewhere. It just might have a louder or a quieter voice. When it comes to reproductive health, someone with a history of eating disorders is going to be particularly sensitive to reproductive health being dialed up or dialed down. So we need to be really cautious. And I also see, that there's a lot of denial there as well. I've had people come to me like, oh, but I eat loads. And you actually look at their food intake and it's like, okay, well, you might eat what you think are big portions, but it's rabbit food, right? It's all just kind of lettuce and cucumber and barely any actual sustenance there. So there's lots of ways in which an eating disorder, if we look at that as kind of an archetype that lives within us, there's lots of ways that an eating disorder can be sneaky and trick us into thinking that we're kind of being or behaving or eating or moving in a way that is kind of, quote unquote normal, but actually it might be excessive or under. So just watch yourself, be really honest with yourself. And if you are finding that you're using exercise as kind of punishment for, overeating, or, so you associate those two things together, then just tread with caution and maybe just ask someone's professional opinion. Because if we look at all of that, then we can be really honest and work with you together to try and find a solution. Because I find that, in terms of bringing a menstrual cycle back as a result of under eating or over exercising, it is totally 100% possible, but you just need the commitment, and it can feel a bit hard, and so getting the right support is really important.
Yeah, and if we're like, oh, we want you to pull back on the exercise, and you're like, I don't think so. This is how I cope. Well, there's something for you to dig into, because there's other ways to cope, and it's not like exercising too much which then can impact your adrenals. That might be why you're struggling here. We also see obviously people with perimenopause. So if you've got those irregular cycles and the hot flashes, the night sweats, and the vaginal dryness, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, now I'm in menopause and it's over. But we see people's periods come back, and we see those symptoms subside. And so obviously there's a certain age. We don't want to be blind to this, right? But people are having babies in their mid 40s and late 40s. But I also don't want to be giving any kind of false hope and things like that either, right? Like we hear all these celebrities having babies at 48 and 49, and we don't know what they're using donor eggs or what they're doing. But people can get pregnant in their mid to late 40s. And then also, yeah, bariatric surgery. I'm just coming across that a lot, actually, with gastric sleeve and things like that. That can impact the health of the gut microbiome, your nutrient deficiencies. You're only able to eat like a small amount of food. And people will tell me, oh, yeah, everything on my health is great. But, oh, by the way, yeah, about 10 years ago, I had that bariatric surgery, had the gastric sleeve, and now I'm struggling. Well, that is a clue. Like, you just did some major surgery in there, and is there scar tissue, but like what's going on in your it can really disrupt the health of your gut. And so that's anything you want to say about that one? I just find that more and more now. I just think it's why are they doing that to people? It's just horrendous.
Yeah, look, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think people are often torn. You hear so much of the messaging that you hear publicly is, quite. There's so much anti-obesity messaging out there, and so it's kind of like, oh, everything's because you're fat, right? And so it's I can understand why people would do it, because I can understand why people do it, because it's with that anti-obesity messaging, and it's kind of a solution, a very clear solution, but it's not an easy solution. It's a rough ride, going through that surgery, and you're absolutely right, Sarah. It's if you have a stomach with a quarter to an eighth of its natural capacity, then in terms of nutrient deficiencies and actually being able to get what we've just spoken about not getting enough, it can quickly and easily lead to that. So it's no wonder that metabolically it can cause issues. So it's just worth bearing in mind, and worth bearing in mind that if you have had that surgery, you don't worry about it, but just really understand the need to focus on super nutrient dense food, and make sure that you've got some really good bespoke supplementation in there so that your needs are met.
Yeah, don't ignore that piece. Be like, oh yeah, I had that little surgery back then. That can be part of the reason why why you're not able to conceive. So we need to address that in a targeted manner. Also, like with the metabolic crisis going on here, with diabetes on the rise and all that, and Ozempic. I did a whole podcast on Ozempic. I heard the other day where they're like thinking if the baby, if the mother is big, and the baby is bigger, like giving Ozempic at birth. I don't know. Some of this stuff is what's going on with big pharma. We just need to be like advocating for our own health, and there's just a major push. Like it's good that we have some of these solutions, right? But getting back to eating, like getting away from ultra processed foods and eating things that are naturally gluten-free and dairy-free, like meats and veggies and fruits and things like that. And grains as tolerated. That's anyway. I'm going off on tangent here, but it is like there's things we can do as the bottom line. We don't need to sit back and wait and pump our body full of drugs and thinking that's the solution, because I did that for years with antibiotics and all sorts of stuff. Got myself backed up against the wall, was peeing blood, had all these chronic UTIs, and when I changed my diet and addressed the gut infections, and the biggest one, when you've got low estrogen, like what we see is that adrenal piece. And people are like telling me, I'm not stressed. And I got to tell you, you might not be stressed now, but I'll say, well, what was happening a couple of years ago? I was working 14 to 16 hours a day, people tell me. I didn't even have time. I had one person tell me they didn't sleep for a whole year. They slept maybe an hour at their desk. I'm like, and now their health is destroyed. And that's an extreme situation, right? But like, this is what's happening out there. We're killing ourselves for these jobs. And then now we're, later in our 30s and early 40s, and we're like, oh my goodness, biology takes over. We need to have our baby, and we need to, take some time and work on our health. And get ourselves in the best possible shape to, to do that. Ovarian cyst, that can be potentially a reason. Anything you want to say about ovarian cyst? We do see that a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, ovarian cysts can be can work either way. Ovarian cysts can be, again, metabolically active themselves, right? And so often we see imbalances of estrogen and progesterone with ovarian cysts. Also with things like fibroids. And one thing that I think is important to say as well here in terms of structural and anatomical issues is that scar tissue can play a big role as well. So I've seen a lot of people who their symptoms are like that of someone with low estrogen. So they're seeing their shorter cycles, lighter periods, etc. And actually, we do, we do some in-depth scanning, and we find that actually it's their scar tissue, either from, sometimes they might have had, like, if it's secondary infertility, maybe from a C-section or from a D&C, if they've had a pregnancy loss in the past, or any kind of abdominal surgery, right? So endometriosis, or, really any kind of abdominal surgery. And so it's just worth bearing in mind as well that having uterine scar tissue can be quite obstructive to normal menstrual cycles too.
Yeah, even a car accident or something like that. People say, well, no. And then when you have a car accident, well, yeah. And so we kind of, these things, we have an OBGYN with a functional medicine background as part of our teams. We need to make sure that things like are structurally sound. Okay, so xenoestrogens, like all the 85,000 chemicals that we're, exposed to. We've done many episodes on this, your personal care, the cleaning products you use, the plastics, all the parabens, all these things that can, mimic, I guess, estrogen in the body. And then you've got little boys with boobs. You're like, what? Like, and then also with fish that are turning, was it frogs that are turning into male frogs turning into a female frog, or is it backwards? Which one? Yeah. Male turning into female, but it's, we're in the middle of a toxic soup. Anything you want to say on that one? We can go off on a tangent on that one. That's it.
Yeah, we could go off on a whole tangent on that one.
Yeah.
But, I think it's just important to note that, the amount of chemicals and toxins that we are exposed to do have a significant impact on our endocrine health.
Yeah, just minimize your exposure. Know that stuff does matter, and not go crazy and throw it all out. But as you go along, start replacing it in a systematic way. There are tons of different, non-toxic options out there, which is good news. Mineral deficiencies, well fed but malnourished, and your gut's not absorbing any of those nutrients. We see, people flatlined across the board from their, looking at their blood chemistry, and then we do hair tissue mineral analysis as well, and that can really look at mineral deficiencies. So we see that a lot. Insulin resistance. Katie and I have done a podcast there on blood sugar and really why that's so important. If it's trending the wrong way, we, looking at glucose monitors or continuous glucose monitors to be able to if you're on a roller coaster, that can be impacting. And this is a theme that we see impacting ovulation in your cycles, with diabetes on the rise, and maybe you don't have pre-diabetes, but maybe there's something that's not optimal in there. We need to be able to optimize that. Anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with the blood sugar piece as well is that we're not just talking about elevated blood sugars. So you might have had your HbA1c done, and that's fine. But it's this peak and crash, right? This up, down, up, down, up, down. And that is what puts a lot of pressure on our system. If we're thinking about stressors, then the insulin resistance, the blood sugar piece, is one of the most significant stressors on the body. And really, ultimately, when we're thinking about estrogen production and reproductive health at large, we're thinking about our body just needs to have that sense of safety and security, because it's ultimately we've got to always come back to looking at things through the evolutionary biological lens when it comes to this, because humans take a huge amount of energy. There is a lot of energy expenditure involved in growing, birthing, and raising a human baby. You know, we give birth to, compared to other mammals and other animals, we give birth to really premature young, because we started walking on two legs, and so our hips are narrower, and our heads, our brain to body size is bigger. So we have these narrow birth canals, meaning that we have to give birth to young who are completely helpless. So it's not just that we have pregnancy and birth, we then have a lot of energy that goes into raising our young. So it's a huge cost to the body, and our bodies, therefore, this isn't to go against us, it's to protect us and to protect our future young. Our bodies need to know that it is safe. It's so simple, you know. We go into a kind of research mode and we obsess about things, but it's really very simple. Our bodies just need to feel safe. That's all. And there are so many ways about the way that we live in the modern world that stops that from being the case, you know, and that's from work stress to sleep to the chemical exposures to the nutrient deficiencies to the blood sugars. It all adds up, and it amounts to the fertility crisis that we're seeing today, you know. So the blood sugar piece is one of the real critical parts of the equation, and it's really simple to look at, you know.
I think intuitively we know this when we start to like get back to, you know, source with the universe, God, whatever it is for you, God, to be able to listen to our body. And we know where things are out of alignment. No one, you don't need to have someone to tell you that maybe working 50, 60 hours a week is maybe not good for your health, that not getting enough sleep, that you're eating ultra processed foods, you know, stopping by the drive-through and all that sort of stuff. We know all this, but that's why to have someone to actually help you to you know, to make the changes, and using testing so you can fast track it is essentially you know, the key here. Adrenals, like we talked many times about that. Is it early menopause, or is it your adrenals that, so, you know, the cortisol should rise in the morning and then go down at night. A lot of times like it's flatlined. Thyroid, we see a lot of hypothyroidism. Medication can be part of it, but we see many people with Hashimoto's with, you know, with the thyroid antibodies sky high. We like them below 10. We got people, you know, let's go for IVF, and their thyroids are 200, 300, 400, like the antibodies. I'm like, we're concerned about a pregnancy loss here. Like, we've got to be, you know, it's working on your health, because we don't want you to have to go through that. You have people going through, you know, round and round of IVF and having losses. Like, this stuff is traumatic. And so medication to support the thyroid can be part of it, but we need to dig into, well, why is the thyroid off? The stress piece, the mental emotional side of things, like we've talked about, that is the biggest one for me. And it can be a real hard one to be able to, on your own, to see, well, how do I pull back? Do you wake up in the morning just anxious and worrying about your day, hating your job, all these things? And it's not about quitting your job. It's like being able to, you know, set some boundaries and really prioritize where you are in life right now, and what you need to do, how you can delegate. You don't need to attend every last meeting, be on Zoom calls for 9 hours a day. Like, there's things we can do to, you know, put yourself first, as, you know, the oxygen mask kind of thing, as you prepare to have your baby. And you know, mother yourself now, because when the baby comes along, like, we've got to take care of ourselves. Otherwise, you know, how are we going to take care of someone else? And so we need to start now. And then
I
some
add to that, Sarah.
Yeah.
You made me think of something though, and this isn't about pointing the finger or blaming, you know, self-blame or anything like that. But and it can be a hard thing to hear, I think. But so many of the people that I speak to and hear the stories of, they are so busy, you know. They have so much going on in their life, and they're so helpless. And again, I'm not pointing at fingers here, but it makes me always think, you have no space in your life for a baby. How is a baby going to fit into this picture? You know, and all they can think about is getting pregnant. But actually, you need to consider that it's like, oh, well, we'll get pregnant and then we'll figure it out. And it's like, well, actually, you know, how about creating a bit of space now? Because even, you know, I'm perhaps getting a bit woo-woo here, but in terms of energetics, you know, if there's no space, then there's no space. And so if we just create some space, then that could be anything. It could be boundary setting. It could be having a clear out in your home. You know, it could be just having 10 minutes in a day to breathe. It could be swapping out Netflix in the evening for reading a book. There are just a million and one different ways that you can create a tiny bit of space in your life, and actually those tiny actions, they create the biggest shift.
To me, it's getting outside, like I'm not into watching a sunrise because I'm getting my sleep, but watching a sunset, watching a
Right.
sunset, putting your feet in grass. I love walking around, like we have a place up north, our little trailer there, and I'm running around my bare feet and chasing the dog. And, it's just like being out in nature. I can be like, when it's warm, like, let's be outside. But the thing is, like, if you're like super busy, busy people get stuff done. So that's your superpower. So let's put that busyness into you. And you're here listening to this podcast, you're probably in research mode, like, let's try to figure this out, deep diving into it. But it is, using that strength and focusing on yourself now, instead of doing all these things for everyone else. And not, and that does impact your health. So it is about, saying no to everyone else, yes to you. And, as we prepare for pregnancy here. There could be some other things for low estrogen. So obviously with like POI, there can be a genetic component to that. If there's Turner syndrome or Fragile X, most of the people we work with, or all the people we work with, they don't have genetic issues with this. There's something else that's triggered, the low AMH and high FSH. We see a lot of autoimmune conditions, primarily celiac, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis. We see a lot of irritable bowel, so ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, and other autoimmune. So we need to, that can be an issue too, to dig into. The conventional system will just throw a pill at you for all those things. We need to look at, underneath the underlying healing opportunity, what's been missed. Maybe you've got damage to the ovaries, like we're saying, if there is endometriosis. We work with a lot of people with endo. Sometimes you have to have, like, people are having, surgery with their tubes removed, like the endo is growing. Well, we need to see, and you're having all these painful periods for years. Well, why are these things happening? And being able to, prevent it from growing, and to taking a targeted plan with that. The excessive stress we talked about, I guess, is there, and then obviously the diet piece, we talked a lot about, the elimination diet, taking out those inflammatory foods. Just stay away from the processed stuff. If you're like got to read a whole bunch of stuff going, is this gluten-free? No, like, that's not the one for you. And like, I am over here, I'm not I literally had this vicious little chip habit that probably for like, I don't know, 4 years, it became, oh, I'm going to have chips on Friday. And then I'm like, well, then Thursday. Then the next thing I was having freaking chips every day. I don't even like chips. I'm like, I don't even want them. I want chocolate. But, so I was like, what happened? So now I've like, because I stopped eating nuts. And then, so now I'm back having not like pounds of nuts, like not having bags of almonds and, almond butter and all the rest of the stuff. But it is to, look at these snacks, see how that's, how you can regulate your blood sugar, and just don't eat the ultra processed foods, which I think is the overarching message. Not necessarily, we want you to do the elimination diet to take out some of the top allergens, but it's not being on this restrictive diet for the rest of your life. Like that's been, I got people telling me, I've been eating this way for 4 years. I have meat and fruit and I have a veggie. What? Like, and you can't eat anything else? Like, that sucks. So we need to heal the gut. You can bring most of the foods back in. Some of the symptoms, some supplements, again, we need to do the targeted diet and lifestyle changes in conjunction with this. So black cohosh can be helpful. Red clover tea, which we have a lot of our clients have red clover tea. Not just like, I got people here telling me they're just drinking tea all day long, these teas, these fertility teas, and then we forgot to do the diet, the lifestyle, the toxins. So this, you've got to make all those changes together. But anything you want to say about black cohosh or red clover tea, Katie?
Yeah, I think it's just to say that I would always recommend taking those under the guidance of a practitioner, because they're not really the kind of things that these are all quite potent. Herbs are it can be really potent, and I've seen, for example, I've seen a client who had low estrogen take red clover tea for only a month, and then her estrogen swung completely in the opposite direction, and then we were dealing with a high estrogen situation. So, we need to be really cautious. It's not just like, let's throw everything at this that we hear about in a podcast. These can be helpful, but they need to be done in a really delicate way, and we cannot overlook investigating the root causes. No low estrogen picture is because of a deficiency in black cohosh, right? It's yes, herbs can be really effective and helpful, but we also need to look at the why. Why is your estrogen low? Why is your menstrual cycle not performing as it should? And it comes back to that basic evolutionary biology principles that we spoke about before, and it's simple, but it can be hard to do by yourself. And so having someone to just take you by the hand and say, look, it's okay, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to look at, we're going to take an objective look at your life, we're going to assess everything, we can see then what we need to prioritize, because prioritization is key. When we're looking at behavior change, we're not going to do everything all at once, we're going to take it a step at a time. So I think really just never underestimate the impact of addressing the underlying root causes of things. You can't just throw a supplement at everything and hope for the best.
Yeah. And so to me, you're in a very powerful position right now, right? To be able to make these changes. The majority of us can get pregnant naturally. Like, let's dig in, take action, do it in a personalized way. And just because you're dealing with some of these symptoms doesn't mean it's the end of the line for you. So there is hope. We see it all the time. People getting their periods back and going on to get pregnant. So awesome. Well, anything else, Katie, you wanted to say on this one?
No, I think we're good.
Awesome.